Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
The third NHL coaching change headlines our show today. Welcome to NHL Wraparound. Vic Morren along with Neil Smith, and we will have a special guest. Arthur Staple from The Athletic will talk Rangers and Islanders very shortly. But first, three things that you need to pay attention to. And we start with the Chicago Blackhawks, who on Thursday fired Luke Richardson as head coach, replacing him with Anders Sorensen, the first Swedish-born head coach in NHL history. And Neil, this move is somewhat confounding to a lot of people because Steve Simmons of Post Media had said, this move is more a reflection on management getting proper personnel than it is on the head coaching.
Oh, absolutely. This is when Jim Montgomery got fired by Boston, everybody jumped right away to say, well, this is more on Don Sweeney and not giving him the players and not, Lindholm and Zadorov have not been good signings in this summer. And this one here is even more crystal clear to me. This one here of firing Luke Richardson reminds me of David Quinn being fired by the San Jose Sharks. Like, what did you think he was going to be able to do with this personnel that you gave him? Did you really think he should be doing and getting more wins with this personnel? For goodness sakes. And the same with, as I said, with David Quinn in San Jose, they fired David Quinn. Like, what? The car didn't have the car had no engine. And then you fired the car driver for not winning the race. To me, it's asinine, but Luke Richardson was a good coach. I don't know Anders Sorensen. He's got the interim title, so until he gets rid of that, I guess we can't really say that he's the first real Swedish national head coach, but he's the first one even to be an interim. So we'll see how he does, trying to get this Blackhawk team to win a few more games. God himself wouldn't be able to get this team into the playoffs.
A lot's been said that this is systems versus personnel. And Kyle Davidson had said that the systems that were in place didn't match the personnel. But isn't he the guy that's supposed to fill in this roster? And he did make some signings during the offseason. He got Pat Maroon. He's got Tyler Bertuzzi. He's got Foligno. But the reality is what is this truthfully doing to upgrade the play of Connor Bedard, who has actually taken a bit of a step back this season?
Well, Connor Bedard has got the sophomore jinx if you've ever seen one. He came into the league last year, albeit on a bottom-feeding Chicago team, won Rookie of the Year, put up some great numbers. But everybody knows that this year, number 98 is a lot more easy to recognize for the other team than he was last year. Last year, they thought he was just a little pipsqueak out of junior, and they might have taken it easy, and he burned a lot of teams. So this year, then this is what always goes on with great rookies, is the second year, they struggle a little bit to find how they have to play when they're being watched more carefully than they were in their rookie season. I doubt that anybody could tell Connor how to play other than himself and his own instincts, and that will come around. But I just think if Kyle Davidson had a problem with the way that the Blackhawks were playing or the systems that they were using, why didn't he go down and talk to Luke Richardson and have some meetings to let Luke explain why he's doing the things he's doing and explain to him why you think they should do it differently? Although I've never heard Kyle Davidson's name in a hockey book ever before. And I have watched Luke Richardson all the way from Peterborough Pete's, all through his playing career, all through his coaching career. right through to coaching a game in the final a couple of years ago for the Montreal Canadiens to now getting the chance with the Blackhawks. I think he knows what he's doing. I think so. And I don't know how Kyle Davidson can. I mean, you might ask Pete Davidson how to do it.
You know, what's remarkable for a club that won 3 Stanley Cups in the last decade, that they are almost borderline irrelevant in the Chicago sports scene. And you got to put this in some context, that the high water mark in Chicago right now was the Cubs finishing 4 games over 500 last year. The Bears are a laughingstock with their head coaching and all the shenanigans and ways that they have learned to lose games this year. The Bulls are 5 games under 500. And the White Sox are coming off an historically bad season in MLB. So to become irrelevant amongst that group of teams is remarkable, and almost to the fact that in order to find Blackhawk games on TV, some people actually have to use a digital antenna to bring in the Hawks games. So it's just remarkable how the perception of this club has dropped in terms of the sports landscape in the Windy City.
Yeah, well, it doesn't take long, right? I mean, you know, you get people excited because you got the first overall pick. You get the right guy. He is by all analysis, he is going to be a franchise player, but it takes a long time. And I said to you the last couple of years, I mean, they've torn this thing down to the girders, right? They've torn this down and now, you know, it's going to take a long time to build this back up. And it's been a long time already. And it has been a long time. And so the people are going to get, like anywhere else, they're just going to say after a while, you know, okay, I'll wait till they're better and then I'll spend my money on them. I'm not going to do it right now. I'll just wait.
Yep. All right. Enough oxygen on this. Number 2. I don't even think people remember when I said number 1. Number 2, the Capitals have now won 9 straight on the road after winning games in Toronto and Montreal over the weekend. This club has no players going to the Four Nations Faceoff. So in addition to having a .741 winning percentage, tops in the NHL along with Minnesota, now they got a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, having not had any players named to this tournament.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. Logan Thompson, I thought might have been one that could have been named by his play. You know, if the Russians weren't, if there was a Russian team being put into this tournament, obviously Alexander Ovechkin would be playing. So, I mean, they're remarkable. They were remarkable last year to get into the playoffs with that motley crew. Now they upgraded this year and they're playing great. If Spencer Carberry isn't the top guy for the Jack Adams Award this year at this point, I don't know who is.
You know, things are going well when Tom Wilson, who a lot of people believe should have been named to Team Canada, he gets hit by friendly fire in the first period, takes a shot off the face from the stick of Jacob Chikrin, and winds up scoring the tying and go-ahead / game-winning goal in Montreal on Saturday. So it's just all turning up big for the Caps.
Yeah, I think things just go right. I mean, they're fun to watch. I love watching them. They're never out of the game. They fight right till the end, and it must be a lot of fun for Joe Beninati and Craig Laughlin, our buddies there that do the games for the Capitals on TV. It must be fun to do the games.
Has to be. I mean, they were hard to play against last year, and now they have upgraded their offense, their goaltending, and so definitely a team to watch for the balance of this season. All right, so number 3, and last Monday we did not do an NHL wraparound because you were a little busy adding a member of the family to the Smith household.
Yes, we got a new little Sammy and a 8-week-old yellow lab puppy. And she is just makes everybody melt. As soon as you show her to people, everybody wants to hold her and kiss her and touch her. That's what puppies do to people. But No, she's a new little member of the family. My 11-year-old AJ, that some of our listeners are familiar with, predicting some of the games last playoffs. He's not too happy with the little one around because he's like a grumpy old man that doesn't need this little kid biting at his heels. But I'm sure they'll bond at some point.
Well, the reason that we bring this up also is because hockey in general has done so much to champion and advocating animal rescue and adoption. The NHL has its Stanley Pup, and they've done some videos on that and have created more awareness towards animal rights and, like I said, adoption and rescue. And Charlie and Kylie McAvoy have been very active as well, as have John and Christine Tortorella, who started really a lot of this awareness from their days in New York. They took it to Columbus, and now that has continued in Philadelphia. So I have a dog as well. We have Sophia, and as you said, they bring joy and even a little bit of adventure to our lives, and certainly something that we both enjoy very much, and we hope a lot of our listeners do as well. So if you don't have a pet, go out and adopt one and feel what we feel.
Well, I'm happy to welcome on to NHL Wraparound the New York hockey columnist for The Athletic, Arthur Staple. Arthur covers the Islanders and Rangers and probably knows more about both of them than either of us do, Vic. But Arthur, welcome in.
It's good to be here, guys. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. And you're coming from you get to write right now about a pretty turbulent New York area with the two teams of the Rangers and the Islanders. This episode is actually called New York Shuffle because we could just imagine besides Jacob Trouba, there'd be some other shuffles, but it's a turbulent time for sure at the Garden.
Yeah, you could probably speak to some of those times better than just about anybody. You experienced plenty of them in your years there, and now kind of the cycle does seem to come back around every few years. They had a couple of nice runs under Chris Drury, going to the Eastern Conference Final 2 of his 3 years. But you also know all about the impatience from above at the Garden. When they start winning, they want more and more and more, like any organization would, but how they react to it is always a little bit peculiar. And I'd say peculiar, even for the Garden, is how I could describe the last few weeks of a team that had a normal losing streak and pretty much kind of threw a live grenade in the middle of the locker room there. And now we are where we are. They still haven't really righted the ship on the ice, but they've made some changes, moving out their captain in a very dramatic way. And we kind of all are waiting around to see what's going to happen next.
The Jacob Trouba debacle these are my words, started in the summer, ended up with them banishing him to Anaheim. I've been asked on several interview shows that I go on now, people want to talk to me because of what you just said, the New York relevance and that. And I say to people, it's just not the way you treat people. They ask, will it reverberate in the locker room? Will it reverberate with them being able to recruit people to the Rangers, knowing that you could get treated like that? And I said, well, money always talks. But what are your answers to those, Arthur? You're closer to it than me.
I think they do have a pretty established reputation now around the league between the Barclay Goodrow situation and now this Trouba situation, which dragged out a bit. Even throwing Chris Kreider's name into that group text that Chris Drury sent out a few weekends ago to the other 31 GMs, inviting people to other GMs to make trade offers specifically for Trouba, his captain, and Chris Kreider, longest serving Ranger, one of the top 3 in goals all time as a Ranger. I think that sends a pretty clear message. And I agree with you that it's not going to hurt them recruiting players or trading for players. It's still New York. People want to come play here. Where I think it will have the most impact is if you want to dip big into free agency, you're going to have a negotiation, much like how it went with Igor Shesterkin, where you're going to have a player and an agent who are going to insist on no move clauses for the entire life of the contract, which hamstrings you as you get down further towards the end and players in the back half. And certainly you want to have that flexibility of whether you take a no move after 4 years and turn it into a no trade clause, which is what they did with Trouba. Chris Kreider's only had no trade protection. So I think the way that agents and players are going to negotiate with the Rangers is going to change. And that hurts you. That hurts your business. You may not want to commit to doing all those kinds of things. If you do commit, suddenly in a few years, if things take a dip like they did this year, you have no maneuverability, and with Shesterkin, his contract is so front loaded and so filled with signing bonuses, it's buyout proof too. There's no point in buying that one out if something takes a bad turn with him. So I don't think people will stop coming to New York, but I do think they will think twice about what kind of trade protection they have and what kind of guarantees they can get that what happened to Jacob Trouba and Barclay Goodrow won't happen to them. And that may change the way that they do business and may hurt them a little bit.
Arthur, the Rangers have now traded their last three captains in season before Trouba, Ryan Callahan and Ryan McDonough, and they get Urku Vakanainen and a fourth-round pick, but they pick up $6.9 million in the swap. Is this just a salary dump here for potentially more moves going forward? Because right now, this club, it's not a top three in the Metro. It's in a wild card position, very precariously, but realistically, they're closer to a bubble team right now.
Certainly the way they're playing, it's hard to argue with that. My argument would be, I think if you look at the rest of the East, I don't think this team is as mediocre as the group of whatever 7 or 8 teams that are kind of hovering around the cut line. I don't think that they're that much worse than Jersey or Washington or Toronto because of the talent they have. Shesterkin, the beginning of the season, the reason they were 12-4-1 to start the year was Igor Shesterkin and Jonathan Quick and Artemi Panarin. You've got some incredibly talented people there that far surpass the same quality on some of those other bubble teams. So I feel like they can get it together and right the ship pretty easily. But I also feel like, what Chris Drury has done really well in his time as GM is create or conserve his cap space for the deadline and make some interesting moves. You think back to the 21-22 season, his first year on the job. They added Andrew Kopp. They added, a few guys beyond that who really helped Frank Vetrano too. Guys that were really integral to them getting to the conference final and going up 2-0 on Tampa that year. So I feel like, in season, Chris Drury knows what he's doing. He's very calculated with that kind of stuff. And this cap space, whether they're going to go for a blockbuster immediately and try to change some things and get, instantly, I don't know if that's really workable right now, considering lots of other teams are still in the playoff hunt. But as you get closer, February, March, having that kind of space and being a team that could really be a contender with a couple of tweaks will be valuable. It was the Trouba trade was a salary dump. To be able to trade him in the middle of the season with all the talk around him about how badly they wanted him out of New York and to not have to retain money, I think that's number one. Fourth-round pick, you would have thought they would have had to give a pick to get rid of this guy, the way that they were talking about him and the way that he'd been playing. And Vakanainen, to me, is kind of a warm body. He's been around in Boston and Anaheim's, he was first-round pick, so he's got that pedigree, but he hasn't really played like, a former first-round pick for either of those teams. He did get a lot of games last year with a pretty terrible Ducks team, but I don't know if that's a good measure of what he can be. So maybe he'll stick around as the 7th. Maybe they'll put him on waivers and try to send him down to create even more cap space since he makes around 1.1. But I think this was about two things. It was getting Jacob Trouba's $8 million cap hit off the books in full, and also just creating that space in the roster and space on the cap to be able to maneuver going forward.
So to that end, the question is, what's next? Because, of course, the big rumor out there, and it was put out there by Larry Brooks, that there is something in the cauldron for Brady Tkachuk of Ottawa. And, of course, the Senators are denying that. So do you see anything coming sooner than later with this club? Or do you think that Drury would prefer to see if things kind of smooth out a bit and wait until the deadline?
I'm sure that they've called on Brady Tkachuk. I know that they've called Vancouver on JT Miller, who Drury tried to get at that 22 trade deadline a few years ago, but wouldn't give up Braden Schneider in that deal. JT Miller's still on leave. He's starting just now to come back. So we'll see where that goes with Vancouver. I have no intel on whether that leave was related to him wanting to not be in Vancouver anymore. He certainly bounced around a little bit since the Rangers had him as a draft pick, and he came up back at about 10 years ago or so. So I think those are the kind of players they're asking about to try to really shake things up and change their core. The issue with changing your core is you got to swap somebody out. Brady Tkachuk makes whatever, $8.5 million. So does JT Miller's up in that $8 million range. Not a lot of guys you can accommodate with that sort of salary. And you still have to get rid of somebody else because their top six is pretty full. You can make some changes. I don't know that they're gonna alter their play where you end up with Mika Zibanejad being a fourth liner or a winger if you bring in a JT Miller. So they've got to figure out who goes in one of these deals and whether you can really make it work in the middle of the season. It's we're barely 30 games in. I can't recall the last time that was a hockey trade with guys with years left on their deals at mega, salaries that you just sort of swapped one for one or tried to make work in December. Maybe he's laying the groundwork to kind of revisit things later in the year or in the summer if things go south with this season. Tkachuk is probably the guy that they'd want the most. I'm sure that Chris Drury has heard the same things that I've heard over the last year plus, that Tkachuk doesn't love it in Ottawa. He's tired of all the losing. I think that they've kind of changed some things now. Obviously, new ownership, new GM. I'd heard fairly recently that maybe he wanted to redouble his efforts to be there. You watch them play last night, lose another one to the Islanders at home, and you say, I don't know what's going to change there. I think they are listening on some of their other guys. I don't know if they're the big needle movers, but, I've heard Shane Pinto's name. He's a local kid from Long Island. I've heard Josh Norris, who's been hamstringed by injuries a lot. I've even heard Thomas Chabot, and that's an interesting name as far as the Rangers are concerned, but because I think if you watched the game yesterday, you saw, all right, they took Jacob Trouba off their D-core. It still doesn't look right in their own end. Their coverage is still really soft. They didn't give up a ton of high danger chances. I would put that loss more on Jonathan Quick than maybe the team defense giving up these grade A's like they've done in a lot of games. But I just don't see a lot of the aggression from guys like Keandre Miller, from Adam Fox. And I don't know if you fix that bringing in one guy like a Chabot, or maybe if you can find an equivalent young defenseman out there. But they've got a decision to make on Keandre Miller. He's now kind of the big pending restricted free agent that they've got. And if they decide they really want to alter that chemistry back there, maybe you look at a trade like that and trade Miller and try to bring in somebody like Chabot. But again, it's the middle of the season and Ottawa's a couple points out of a playoff spot. I don't know that any team is ready to do that outside of, if you look at a team like the Hawks, that's probably, buried for the season. They've got some pending UFA guys, some veterans. I think before the season even started, I had my eye on Alec Martinez, who's got a complicated history, let's put it that way, with the Rangers since he scored the cup-winning goal back in 2014. But let bygones be bygones if he can still play, and he's a good lefty, dependable, stay-at-home type guy. If that's a guy that they can bring in to fix some of their defensive zone issues and just bring in a veteran to stabilize things, maybe that's the route they go. It's certainly not a needle mover, but it's a guy who could probably help.
Arthur, before I get on to Shesterkin, because he's the most important player in this, but I wanted to ask you, what seems to come to my mind with the Trouba thing is, who do they have now as their deterrent? Trouba, from my vantage point, was always the guy that, boy, you had to keep your head up. I mean, he did KO a lot of people. He was the one guy that would fight and throw his helmet down. You remember that famous thing and yell at his bench, like, let's get going. Who's their deterrent? Like, who's their guy that says you're not going to walk out of here with an easy win, or you're going to be punished for it?
They don't have one. And I think that's been part of their issue. It's not even you don't want somebody who's just going to drop the gloves and fight. I mean, if they wanted that, they'd put Matt Rempe in the lineup every night and live with the mistakes and the kind of the growth part of actually playing hockey. But leaving the sideshow part of it aside, I think you saw the rest of the team in these first few months of the season with Trouba too much in his head, letting it affect his play on the ice, the stuff from the summer and whatever else was going on behind the scenes. It just seemed like the reasons that he became captain, because he was kind of the unquestioned behind the scenes leader of this group, that it wasn't working out for whatever reason, and it was starting to spill over onto the ice. So, unfortunate that it happened. And if you feel he had to go because you can't have your third pair guy making $8 million, regardless of whether he's captain or not, fine. But who did you see filling the void in what, leadership, not just being a deterrent, but just being a guy who can get them all to play, can carry the message from Peter Laviolette and the coaching staff to the team, to carry the message from Chris Drury, if that's what you need. You didn't see it. And you've got guys that have been here a long, long time who never really had to fill that role. And I think it's an open question whether they can. People, the fans love Kreider. I always hear from people, he should be the captain because of the way he carries himself. He's very soft-spoken, but he's a guy who likes things very calm. He does a lot of his leadership work one-on-one with young guys, whether off-season he wants them to come work out with him up here in Connecticut or talking to them on the ice. He spends a lot of time on the ice. He's not a rah-rah, follow-me type guy. Mika Zibanejad, same. Artemi Panarin, same. Adam Fox, same. Maybe Vincent Trocheck is that kind of guy, but he's not really taken that step here yet. And his play has been, I think he's been better lately, but his play was a little bit erratic too. And that, I think, can affect you as a leader. So really the only guy that you look in that room and say, this is a guy who brings people together, who's been around, who knows what he's doing, is Jonathan Quick. And your backup goalie is not going to be your team leader in kind of that obvious way. So it's a void. And Laviolette said it. I'm sure Chris Drury said it the other day. You want to see who's going to pick up the baton now that Trouba's gone. And right now, given the results, it's in the two games, and maybe it's still fresh, but they played the Penguins on Friday night, and that was as milquetoast and lifeless as the Garden has been on any night that I've seen in the last couple of years since I came back to covering them. They won because the Penguins were worse, and that's really about the only reason they won that game. And then they got up against a kind of middling Seattle team and just stopped playing, really. Goalie didn't make enough saves. Every chance they gave up ended up in the net. And I think there was a lot of just standing around, looking at each other, hanging heads. Who is going to lead this group? And it kind of becomes this self-fulfilling cycle where you take Trouba out of the mix because you want to see the team improve, and he's not doing his job as a leader. And now if nobody else steps forward, there's going to be more memos. There's going to be more group, messages to the GM group chat. This guy's available. This guy's available. And it just keeps looping on itself. You can certainly say Chris Drury should not have done this in the middle of the season and it's too disruptive. But now maybe his players are starting to justify his distrust of whether this team can really get over the hump and do it because they're not pulling together the way they need to.
One quick one about Shesterkin, because that was a great answer, and thank you for that. But one quick, Shesterkin's obviously got 8 years, 11 and a half AAV. This is a real question from me. Doesn't an $11.5 million contract to the goaltender, like down the road, getting into years 3, 4, 5, isn't it going to be hard to support that, franchise goaltender with great forwards and great defensemen to perhaps get a chance at a championship when the goaltender's using that much of the cap? I
mean, in theory, yeah. I think when we're looking at the way the cap is projected to go up in the next few years, I think the Board of Governors meeting is going on right now down in Florida, and they're going to present to the owners, Gary Bettman, I think, said 92.5 for next year. I've heard through PA sources, maybe it's going to be more like 94 or 95, kind of get that accelerator going. We're talking 100 million probably within 2-3 years. So I don't think it's going to be as onerous as, say, when Carey Price signed for 10.5 in Montreal, and that's whatever 14% of the cap, and the cap doesn't go up as much and then ends up because of COVID stalling out, and the Canadians basically needed Carey Price to retire while still having that contract active to be able to do anything. And really, I think you see the results in Montreal. It's been a tough go for them. So I think this is different. And I think Shesterkin could have gotten significantly more, maybe $1.5 million, $2 million more per year on the open market if he'd gone that far. And I think the temptation was there to go that far when he decided he didn't really want to negotiate that strongly during the season, whatever the last offer was before the season started, whether it was 10.5 or 11 or something like that. I think they were understanding that 13 million was definitely possible. And that was the number that I'd heard thrown around behind the scenes. So I think in this case, him deciding that he wanted to stay meant maybe taking a little bit less than he'd hoped because of what you're talking about, Neil, that he wants the team to be good. You don't want to commit for 8 years as a goalie and be facing what he's been facing this year with, 10 high danger chances a night. I think fans are a little incredulous, maybe not fans of the Rangers, when they, when I get the reaction to writing like I did today, that he did leave money on the table. And also specifically, I think there was a different structure that the Rangers offered that was maybe would have bumped it up closer to 12, but involved different signing bonus structure, maybe not a full no move all the way through. So this is what he took. So he literally left money on the table from the Rangers. And I think fans, it's the biggest contract of all time. How could he do that? I think we're kind of hitting a phase of changing environment because the cap is going to go up in a significant way, in a way it hasn't for a few years because of the pandemic, because of the financial situation of the league. And I think goalies, Sergei Bobrovsky was the first $10 million goalie to win a Stanley Cup. I think there's some teams that are just built a certain way that they need a franchise goalie. They need a star goalie to be able to succeed. And the Rangers, it's been a long time. Pretty much, you had some incredible stars on your Stanley Cup team, but Mike Richter was the guy that got you there. And I don't think it's kind of been an unbroken string of Richter to Henrik Lundqvist and now to Shesterkin. That goaltending is what drives things in New York for this Rangers franchise. And the thought of going away from that, of letting him walk in free agency, could have been tempting because that's a lot of money available to you to do other things. But if you cheap out and go with a $6 million goalie, you look at Colorado, they managed to win with Darcy Kemper, who was not really considered an elite goalie at the time. And I think they got into that mode of thinking, well, we can get that mid-level guy. And they went out and traded for Alexander Georgiev without really a ton of intel on him, knowing what kind of guy he is behind the scenes. And they've struggled. He's won a ton of games for them, but not when it counts. So I think there's a lot of examples around the league of the worry of paying your goalie too much versus committing to a different path with a next tier level goaltending and not changing the team around that to make sure that you can win despite it having a goalie give up a couple of softies now and again. And the Rangers, to my mind, chose the right path because this guy is here. You know what we've got. He's been really good, / elite. He's been the main reason why they've gone as far as they've gone in 2 out of the last 3 years in the postseason. I think that's a gamble worth making.
So Manhattan's nickname is Gotham. And the nickname Gotham comes from England, where they said that this town where everybody ran around like crazy people. And that's how Manhattan got the name Gotham. So let's leave Gotham and go out onto the island where they're not running around in chaos like we just talked about, but they're not very good. And where do we go with the Islanders? I mean, they can't protect leads. Their special teams are dreadful, but they're still hanging around in the standings. And, they beat Ottawa yesterday, albeit being outshot 31-13 and outchanced by a gazillion. Arthur, I don't know where to go with the Islanders other than to ask you, where do we go?
Yeah, it's, they've got that grinding DNA that was instilled in them by Lou Lamoriello, by Barry Trotz when Lou managed to bring Barry in here. Kind of you were around in the dynasty era. Those guys were all pretty much homegrown guys. Even Al Arbour was not the coach that he became before he was an Islander. Barry Trotz to me is the biggest free agent acquisition the Islanders have ever made in their 50 plus years as a franchise. And it really helped change the fortunes of the team because they were going through so many changes with Garth Snow out after so many years and Lou Lamoriello in and John Tavares out. There was we did have a lot of chaos back then in the summer of 2018, and Barry Trotz really calmed things down and brought a confidence to that group, a lot of whom are still here. And that's probably part of the main issue, is that a lot of those guys from 6-7 years ago are still here. and still playing big roles. And they do have that grinded out DNA. They're never out of a game. I think the Seattle game where they lost badly last week was the first time they were down by 2 goals at the end of the first period all year. So, you give them some credit because they do have a decent goalie. They do have that grinding mentality to never get too far out of a game or get too far ahead, but also they don't have the skill or the will or the whatever it is to close out the games. If they had finished off half of the games and where they've blown in the third period, they'd be ahead of the Rangers right now. They'd be in a situation where they could say, okay, we can afford to kind of bob along here and miss a couple of points because we're doing the right thing. They do the right thing for 50 minutes and then it falls apart. And it's maddening to watch for their fans. And it threatens, being that same old Islanders team, being irrelevant for too long. So, but I think with Lou in charge, if they're even close to a playoff spot, which they are at their wacky 11-11-7 record, I don't think they're going to change a whole lot in season. And I don't know if ownership, if Scott Malkin has the appetite to do what the Rangers are doing and kind of ask of his GM, we need to make some fundamental changes in the middle of the season. We need to adjust this thing on the fly. I don't think that they're at that level right now. But even thinking about moving on from Lou Lamoriello, who turned 82 last month, it's a big project to make that change, because when he came in, as he did in New Jersey, it's Lou's show. He's got his son Chris is the assistant general manager. There's not many people in that front office that he didn't bring in. So if you push him out, especially in the middle of the season, it's like you come into an empty office the next day. There's nobody there. So I don't know if Scott Malkin knows the league well enough to have somebody in mind to bring in to run the team right away, or even next off season. It's going to be a big process. They need to get it started as soon as they can, if that's the change they're going to make, because it's very much Lou's team. He's still as sharp as he's been at age 82. But I don't know that he has the appetite to want to change things around. And I don't know if ownership has the appetite to make the kind of front office changes that they might need to make. So you asked me, Neil, where are they going? I don't know. They might just keep going around in a circle like they've done the last couple of years. That's probably not the answer Islander fans want to hear, but I think that's where they are right now.
Well, Arthur, to that end then, if you take a look at this club, and they're sitting right now on the bubble, although they have played 29 games and it's 3 more than the Rangers, who they're tied with in points for the second wild card spot. Is Lou biding his time that they're coming off a very good weekend? They beat Carolina Saturday. They win in Ottawa the next day. And they still have Matt Barzal and Anthony Duclair, who will be returning from injury at some point. So are they biding their time until these guys get back? And then it's going to be essentially the same lineup. And, sometimes I wonder, Arthur, also, was almost there somewhat of a sense that this club was not as good as their advancement in 2020 and 2021 would indicate, given those were truncated seasons, and perhaps there's a sense of security. Hey, we've been this really good team all along, when maybe they're really not.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can probably safely put an asterisk on both of those seasons. I mean, the bubble season that year didn't benefit anybody in the world, obviously, but if you're looking in a very narrow focus of sporting ways, it benefited the Islanders. Adam Pelech was their best defenseman. He'd torn his Achilles in December. He was fully healthy and ready to go when the bubble started. And that was a big change for them. It was something that had really caused them to stumble once he was out. They weren't going to make the playoffs that year if that year had finished with a full 82 game season. So then they get to the bubble, and Barry Trotz, is a master motivator, and that's how they ended up getting as far as they did. And then the next year, a 56 game season where you only see certain teams, not a lot of travel. It's just the way that they play, which is they know they have to beat you with their effort and their will, essentially. They're not super skilled. They do have some skilled guys. They've got some guys who are producing for them right now. And as you pointed out, Barzal is out, Duclair is out, Adam Pelech is out again. He's still an important part of their defense. Mike Riley, who they brought back, is out indefinitely. Alexander Romanov, who's been a pretty good young defenseman for them on their top pair, missed about 10 games too. So you can't discount the injuries, and you can certainly count those guys coming back as additions that you would want to make otherwise. But they were also terrible when all those guys were on the lineup to start the season. They were losing leads and they weren't scoring enough. And, so I'm not completely sure that having them at full strength would mean a whole lot. Maybe they'll start to get on a roll and they'll start to get that grind it out, finish games well mentality going. And they do have enough on their roster, and Patrick Roy has given them enough of an energy boost behind the bench since he came in last January. They are a playoff team in my mind, and that is more an indictment on the rest of the conference than a compliment to them, because they're not at the same level as Carolina and Jersey. Even the Rangers, when they're playing well, they're not at Florida's level. They're not even at Toronto's level. They're in the 6 to 12 range. And, I think people tend to dismiss them. And Neil, you can certainly speak to that even in your brief time there. The Islanders will always be the little brother to the Rangers in terms of the fan base around New York. It's just always the way it is. I've covered the Islanders for, 15 years. And I've heard it from lots of Islander fans. They're always ready to kind of look inward and mend their own garments. They're not the confident Ranger fans who say, why can't they just go out and get Brady Tkachuk? And then, the Rangers have an owner who thinks the same way that a lot of their fans do. Why can't we just do this? And sometimes it happens. The Islanders don't have the ability to bring tons of free agents in, even though once people get to Long Island, they love it. They love raising their families there. Guys tend to stay there when they retire if they played the Islanders a long time. When they trade for guys, some they're reluctant to come, and it ends up being a great experience. They have good facilities. They have a nice arena now. They have all the things you'd want in a team, but the way that they kind of present themselves as an organization, especially with Lou in charge, where he keeps the marketing and the promotion to a very limited scale, if there's anything at all, that you have to sell what's happening on the ice, and they're just not good enough the last couple of years. This is going to be the third straight year they're going to have to make a mad dash just to get into the playoffs, and I think they'll do it. But to me, and to Neil's point earlier, like, something needs to change with this organization, whether it's promoting things better or loosening things up a little bit about some of Lou's rules that have existed for a long, long time. Playing better, being a more successful team on the ice. Maybe, he's made some big changes the last couple of years in the middle of the season. He traded for Bo Horvat 2 years ago and signed him to a long extension. And this guy is, proven to be a pretty good player here. He made the change from Lane Lambert to Patrick Roy last year. And that gave them kind of the goose that they needed to get into the playoffs. But I don't know that you can keep going to that well. They're up against it cap-wise, like a lot of teams. They've got some guys signed long-term that you don't want signed long-term. The three best guys so far this year up front are Anders Lee, who's been a really good captain and player here for a long time. His contract is up after next year. And Brock Nelson and Kyle Palmieri, who are unrestricted free agents at the end of the season, who would bring in the sort of, prospect and draft pick haul that would allow them to start churning over the roster a little bit, but also they're your two best players. So it's stuck in a loop a bit. And it's hard to get away from saying that, because that's the feeling you get. You make all these arguments. I write lots of articles and I start with what can change. And then I get to the bottom of the article. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Nothing. It just keeps going in the same way. And Lou has set it up that he likes the continuity. He likes the consistency, but if you're always in that range and you can never get up to the heights, then I don't know that the fans or the interest is going to be there to stick around when you're just always kind of struggling to get over that playoff cut line.
Well, Arthur, this has been fascinating, and I agree with almost everything you're saying personally. Not that really matters, but the one thing that I find sad for Islander fans is that they have this spectacular building. And if you haven't been in UBS Arena, and I know you have been, and Vic has been, and I've been there a lot, it is just a fantastic building, a fantastic place to play. And they go from what everybody used to call the old barn being the Coliseum, where everybody sort of went, well, that goes with the laughingstock team. They got a crappy arena. They're a crappy team. Well, now they've got a state-of-the-art building, a building I'd rather be in than be in the Garden. And the Garden, it will always be the Garden, but the UBS Arena is beautiful. It's too bad that they're not taking full advantage of that as a franchise because they could be very special if they would take advantage. They've never had this before. They've never had a state-of-the-art place that they're playing that makes them look like a first-class organization. And they certainly do, from a building perspective, look like a first-class organization. I think their ownership is excellent as well at this point. When you think back to the ownership that they've had after Mr. Pickett left, things really hadn't been that great until Mr. Ledecky and Mr. Malkin and now John Collins showed up on the scene. But that aside, I just want to thank you for coming on here and giving us your insights. It's great. It's you're there every game with both of the teams, and that's something that when you're not there and you're just trying to do this off of TV, it's not the same. You're there and you're hearing people and you're talking to people, and we really appreciate getting all those insights.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks a lot for having me on.
And Neil, Arthur Staple, just such a terrific guest, so much insight. And, we could just throw out a question there and he gave us more than what our questions were asking.
You know what? I love reading Arthur Staple in The Athletic on a daily basis about his columns on New York hockey. But when you talk to Arthur, you understand the depth of understanding that he has as a hockey critic, not a hockey guy. I wouldn't call him, but a hockey critic. His knowledge base is immense, and really enjoyed talking to him.
Well, in addition to our website, which we remind everybody is NHLWraparound.com, and of course our short shifts are airing every Wednesday and Friday, we are here to also introduce a new franchise to the NHL Wraparound family starting on January 6th. That's a Monday. And through to the end of the regular season, we will be airing a new show called New York Centric, and it will take into account the New York metropolitan area teams, the Rangers, Islanders, and Devils. And I know that Sabres fans are going to say, well, we're in New York, the Devils aren't, but like we said, it is the New York metro area, and we're going to have more on the Sabres in just a second. But Neil, this was something that we threw some breadcrumbs out probably a few weeks ago, and just believe that there is so much going on in that area and also our connections to New York. This is a great time to add something to our portfolio.
It is, it's fairly easy to do because when you live in that area, you get information about those three teams all the time. They're all three of them are on MSG network, for example. They're all using the same network, and they're all, you hear about those three teams a lot. We both have great contacts in the New York area for knowledge base of what's going on and to find out things. And so I'm really looking forward to doing this and talking about the Rangers, Islanders, and Devils, three teams that I'm very, very familiar with, having worked for the Islanders, having worked for the Rangers, and having competed against the Devils almost since their inception.
That's going to be exciting for all of us, and we're going to bring some guests on for that show as well. So I just mentioned before that we were going to talk about the Buffalo Sabres, and I want to take a really interesting path with them because they're in an 0-5-2 rut right now. Kevin Adams come out and said Buffalo is not a destination right now. So this is a franchise that has not made the playoffs since 2011. They have been through 4 general managers, 7 head coaches, with Lindy Ruff now in his second stint since the club last made the playoffs 13 years ago, soon to be 14. And what do you do with the culture here at this point? Because I think now that the Bills are doing so well, and the Sabres are quickly becoming an afterthought with another disappointing season.
Well, yeah, and this is going on year 14 of no playoffs, as you said. And what do you do to change the culture? You bring in experienced people that know how to set the culture right. And you that's hoping that the Pegula family that own the team are not interfering with making that culture Right. Because to understand what you need to win in the NHL is to have experienced it. You can't just watch it on TV and think you know how to grow a culture. You've got to be part of a winning culture. And if you're part of a winning culture, you might be able to replicate that somewhere else. And I'm not saying anybody there is not good. And certainly Lindy Ruff, the coach, has been to the final in 1999 and has an extensive coaching career. But to change a culture, you have to bring in people that know what a winning culture feels like and then hope that they will change it for you.
Ruff was almost exasperated at the end of Saturday's game with Utah because Tyson Kozak scores his first NHL goal. The team goes up 1-0, and you figure, you know what? 1-0, first career goal. Team should be juiced, and they just flatlined after that. And you start to reach a point where, like with so many clubs that are used to a losing culture, you just start to wait for bad things to happen. And boy, did they happen in that game Saturday. It was almost a microcosm of everything that's gone wrong there in the last 14 years.
And it's true. You end up, and this is what you want to avoid at all costs, but you end up with the bad news bears. And that is that you're waiting for the next bad thing to happen. And, at first at the beginning of games, and you get out to a lead and you forget that, bad things are going to happen. But then as soon as the opposition scores, you go, uh-oh, it's happening again. And, you got to get out of that. And the only way you get out of that is to bring in people, players, coaches, managers that say, it's not going to happen. Yeah, we're down 2-1. It's okay. We're still going to win. We're still going to win. And, I'm not disparaging anybody that is in Buffalo, but there is no one that could argue they don't have a losing culture there. I mean, 13 straight non-playoff years going on to 14 this year. And you can see it with your own eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're not going to bring Walter Matthau in to head coach this team either. So as he turned around the bad news bears, and to compound things, Saturday, defenseman Rasmus Dahlin missed that game with back spasms. So we'll see how long he is out for. The club does host Detroit on Monday to try to reverse this losing streak. And that's another team that has plenty of concerns as well. So let's move on from this. Hey, is it time to get rid of the shootout, Neil?
I wish they'd never brought in the shootout. So you're asking the wrong guy, because I've never liked the shootout. I'm a conservative, old school hockey guy.
As am I.
The shootout to me is a skills competition. It's not part of a team game. But the NHL wanted to have a decision of a win or a loss for every single game. No more ties. And overtime wasn't doing it for them. When they first brought in overtime, they were still ending up with ties. So during the big lockout in 05-06, this is one of the major changes they made, was to bring in the shootout.
And it was probably needed at that time because there was not a lot of certainty in terms of how the league was going to be received coming out of a season-long work stoppage and really being the first professional sports league to actually go through such a thing. So, I think a lot of people at that time were acceptant of the gimmickry, but let's throw some numbers at folks. So this is now year 20 of the shootout. And in the first 10 seasons from 05-06 through 2014-2015, the clubs played 4-on-4. And if there was no decision, they'd go to the shootout. 43.2% of games ended in the overtime and 57% in the shootout. In the 10 seasons since, including this one at 3-on-3, 2/3 of the games are ending in overtime and only 1/3 ending in the shootout. And this season, games are ending in overtime at 79%, 78.6 to be exact. So the thing that I'm going to present to you now, I'm proposing that we extend overtime by 2 minutes to 7 minutes in total. And I think one of the rubs people do have with overtimes are the regroups. And that if a club doesn't like a look when they get into the offensive zone, they back out, maybe even into their own end, and then they start up again, kind of the way the Russians used to play. But I'm saying you're allowed one regroup per offensive entry. And if you go in a second time, whistle blows, face off in your own end, and you're not allowed to change players. Somewhat similar to icing. Your thoughts?
I like your idea. I think it's very good. I think that getting rid of regrouping would really help from a fan's perspective. Certainly having a D-zone face-off gives a scoring chance to the offensive team, the team that did not commit the regroup. But it's going to be hard because everything has to be run through the CBA and it has to be changed by the agreement of the Players Association and the league. So, 79% is pretty good to end in overtime. I didn't know that number. And that's good. And that's what we want, right? We want games ending on team play, not on skills competitions.
So let's come full circle here. Would you be okay after 7 minutes of overtime, getting rid of the shootout and settling for ties the way we used to have them?
I would, but I was never, I never found anything wrong with ties back in the old days. You'll find a lot of people who just don't like leaving a building with a tie. They just don't. And they're accustomed to there's got to be a winner and loser. You're going to get all these people that are going to say, oh, the fans love the shootout. And my answer to that is, yeah. And they love bench clearing brawls, but we got rid of those. What the fans love doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for the game and the competitiveness of the game. So I don't know where this is going to go, Vic. I fear that the shootout is in to stay.
I think there's another piece of this that people kind of miss, that when you win in a shootout, after you've seen 5 minutes of, more often than not, truly exhilarating hockey at 3-on-3, winning in a shootout, it's almost hollow. It's almost like, okay, everybody exhale and whoever gets the extra point gets the extra point. And, to a point that you made earlier about the skills competition, you remember Kuznetsov on the Capitals would pick up this puck at center ice and you could go out and brew a pot of coffee. And by the time it was ready, he still would not have taken his shot.
No, that's right. And the shootout has also ruined the penalty shot.
Yeah.
Because when guys get a penalty shot now, they play it as they do when they are in the shootout. They go side to side and they come in slow and all that stuff. And it's not as exhilarating for the fans as it used to be because you see it all the time with the shootout. You see a penalty shot skills competition. So I fear it's in to stay. And I would love it if it wasn't there.
I know I'm dating myself, but I remember in the 71 finals when Frank Mahovlich got a penalty shot on Tony Esposito. And it was such a rare occurrence. It was an event. And penalty shots now, to your point, just do not have that same cachet as it used to.
No, they don't. And I remember the one that, speaking of Frank Mahovlich in the slap shot, how about in 1993-94, last game for the Rangers at the Chicago Stadium, last time for Steve Larmer to be at the Chicago Stadium. He goes in on Eddie Belfour for Chicago, Larmer playing for the Rangers, and takes a slap shot on his penalty shot. And that was exhilarating too. Yeah,
it was. And it just, like we said, it felt like an event, and that's just not there in today's NHL. Some quick league and player notes. Mark Stone, the captain of the Vegas Golden Knights, returned to the lineup Friday against Dallas after a 14-game absence and picked up an assist. Zach Hyman back in the Oilers lineup after a 5-game absence. He's got 3 goals in 2 games since returning. Nikita Kucherov returned Sunday at Vancouver after missing 2 games with an upper body injury. Ho-hum, a goal and 2 assists in that win by the Lightning. Ross Colton returned for the Colorado Avalanche over the weekend. He had missed 17 games with a foot injury, and he had a goal at New Jersey on Sunday. Max Pacioretty off long-term IR. He played at Pittsburgh after missing 10 games. Jake McCabe onto IR. He last played on November 30th. Sam Ersson and Jamie Drysdale for the Flyers, who had missed 11 and 12 games respectively, returned in a loss against Utah on Sunday. And by the way, the Utah Hockey Club has now won 4 games in a row on the road. Cole Sillinger for Columbus left Sunday's game in Winnipeg after blocking a shot by Colin Miller. And Peter Mrazek, goaltender for Chicago, as if things aren't bad enough there, left game the other day with a groin injury. Drew Camesso has been called up from AHL Rockford. So with that, we enter the human side of the story. And, we started with Arthur Staple and talking about the Jacob Trouba deal. And there's a really unseemly side to things when trades and contracts start to go public and you spend so much time as a GM and I think to a degree, you're always mindful of PR. And when this thing starts to go south, boy, it's really hard to reverse it.
Yeah. And it's really unfortunate. This is a public business. This is a business that has the public trust, meaning that the fans in the different cities and locations, they own the teams. Those teams will probably still be there long after the current owner is gone. It's a trust of the public that's their teams. And, to allow things to get ugly, like the Jacob Trouba thing where, okay, so you want him gone. You wanted to maybe make a move. To let it get public is really bad. Like it's just not good. The player, I talked to you about that this summer. I didn't know how Jacob Trouba was ever going to come in this season and play the way he could play when he knew that the management didn't want him there. Like, how do you do it as a captain, as a leader of the locker room? And, you're just not talking about the player. Now, yes, let's say right off the bat, they're rich. Trouba makes $8 million. He's going to be rich for the rest of his life. His wife is rich, but his wife's going to medical school too in New York. They've got a life there. They've got a little boy. They do have their own life. They're not thinking about, oh, well, we'll put up with anything because we're making so much money. No. And at the end of the day, Jacob Trouba is born in 1994. He's only 30 years old. I mean, he's a young man, and he's not. You're not looking at a guy that's going to be a senior soon. He's still a young guy, and this is tough stuff. And it is ugly. And I tried the best I could my whole career not to let things go public and to keep things under the close to the vest. Not because I wanted to be secretive, but to respect the players, to respect the coaches, to respect the people, and to not let them be in a situation where they were hung out to dry. So, but that does happen, and it's very hard on the family.
And of course, you have dealt with contract disputes and things of that nature, and that stuff tends to get out. I mean, not only in your career, but it's just a part of the business. But there was something really ugly about this with going back to Barclay Goodrow and being put on waivers and then claimed by San Jose, and even Trouba coming out and having to acknowledge the fact that the Rangers were threatening to put him on waivers as well if he wouldn't accept a trade. And to me, that's just a part of business that I think we'd prefer not seeing.
Oh, absolutely. But it's not the way all the teams do business. It isn't. They're not all. Look, you got to do what you got to do. You're being paid a lot of money, millions, usually, these players. And it's a tough business. If you wanted to have a job where you stayed in one location forever, you should have been an accountant. Then you could have your office wherever you want it. But you decided to go into professional sports where there is some cutthroat stuff to it. There's cutthroat on the players. You get up and leave as soon as you become a free agent if somebody else offers you more money, and cutthroat on the teams in that we'll have you here as long as you're productive and then we'll let you go. But you chose that business. It doesn't mean that the club has to treat you with disrespect. And that's what I think we saw in this. We saw that there was a lack of respect for that man, for the captain of their team. And that doesn't sit well with us. I just don't know why you have to do that.
I think we're going to leave it right there because we've pretty much exhausted this topic today. But nonetheless, I think just a ton of insight, not only for this discussion we have just had, but certainly with Arthur Staple from The Athletic joining us earlier in the show. And with that, we want to thank Arthur Staple for joining us, and thank you to our listeners. Please send questions or comments to NHLWraparound@gmail.com, and our website is NHLWraparound.com. And remember that Wednesday of this week, we will be back with our short shifts with more immediate and in-depth coverage from around the NHL. So on behalf of Neil, I am Vic, and we look forward to speaking with you again on Wednesday.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.